for anybody who wants to discuss or bring anything to the table that is either not on the agenda or otherwise is not referenced by typical committee business. So there's a couple new people on the call tonight. Jim's familiar with this as well. If anybody's got anything for public discussion they would like us to consider, would like us to start batting around in our conversations and otherwise formalize for the next meeting, the floor is yours. Would anybody like to say anything that's joining us for the first time tonight? Okay, do any committee members have anything that you feel falls under the topic of public forum? Otherwise, we can obviously move anything else that you want to talk about to other business towards the end of the agenda.
I was wondering if we should post on Front Porch Forum looking for any additional members again.
Yeah, I think we should. I've identified and had conversations with 2 more people in the last week about positions. One of them is new to the area. Another one is deeply connected to the cycling culture here in town and showed an interest. I explained to both of them what the commitment would be, at least in the short term. And so I'm hoping they're going to be able to at least join us for a meeting next month. I hesitated though on bringing anybody into this particular meeting, not knowing yet, and not having reached out to Ian about what the rules are for how we bring in new committee members. Ian, could you tell us the rules around, do we need a quorum to vote new members in, or what? What's the rule here?
Typically, the select board makes the decision about a new committee member, similar to how the original committee was formed. Yep. There's no official way of handling it. I've recommended to chairs of committees and commissions prior to just, obviously, if someone shows interest, or if you reach out to someone and they show interest, invite them to a meeting, just let them know what the committee is about, what the committee is working on, and if their interest continues, then they can fill in a form on the town website in terms of wanting to be on a committee and interest with the details, and then they would come before the select board, and it's usually a fairly quick process, and our questions are fairly minimal. So, and then we would just make a motion as a select board to appoint them to a particular committee.
Got it. In lieu of noting that one of the reasons why I kind of wanted to have some backup people in the mix, especially going into this meeting, was so that we could get back to having some padding for quorums. In lieu of having them sit in on or watch the next meeting, could we potentially have those candidates watch recordings of the previous meetings to get a feel for the committee?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Great. Then
they just want to be familiar with, and obviously if you've talked to them, if you've talked to people, then they are, hopefully. And if not, just direct them to the recordings that are either on Neat or the town website in the minutes area. They can look through prior minutes and get a good feel for it. And if they're, as I said, if they're still interested, they can fill in the form online, and I can link to that in the chat, and then just submit that to the town.
Okay, perfect. I've talked to 4 people overall. Like I said, 2 inside of the last week and a week and a half. All the people that I've talked to personally are fully on board with the overall gist of what the committee's trying to do, as well as what the rationale for why the select board had started it. So we'll look to make a move on that inside of the next week or 2, so that we can move forward with that. Tanya, what else you got?
Oh no, all set.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure. And when I see you come up and the mute's off, I assume you're gonna hit us with something.
Accident.
No, don't worry. So this is a force of habit. I spend too much time on Zooms. Okay, so if there's no other public forum things, then why don't we start talking about the infrastructure grant thing that's been circulated. I know that Jonathan reached out to me for everybody's addresses to send, and some other people had reached out for these things too, to send around information. But that said, I don't have full transparency on who received what. As a perfect example of that, the Melanie Kessler Jerry email chain, I was not on initially. So in fact, I was only copied on it. Though I did get some of the information from some other things, and that's where I made the mistake of following Melanie's lead and thinking that the due date for that was November 1st, and Ian pointed out it's actually November 22nd, which is great for us. A couple things had been brought up around this previously. The grants seem obviously right in the wheelhouse of the committee and what we're trying to do, and obviously what the town, even moves that the town has made already with the enhanced the enhanced crosswalks and things like that. We've also discussed any number of other things throughout the course of these meetings, including improvements or some type of either traffic calming or pedestrian and cycling enhancements to the end of Mountain where it connects onto Devon Lane. Our long-term plan was obviously to use the Pine Street traffic calming as a case study, as a model for what we could do there, noting where we're at with the Pine Street thing and how that's going to kind of switch around a little bit, and probably start with the stop sign initiative or the stop sign portion of that first. It probably makes sense to switch over to more of a discussion around potentially applying for grants for the crosswalk enhancements. That said, we're still early enough in this. We've still got enough time where I feel like we could ask for this for any number of things, since A, it is open-ended, and B, there's that interesting connection there with reaching out and connecting with the elementary school, with having this actually being something that we're doing in tandem with the school. So does anybody have any ideas or thoughts or anything like that? Ian, I know you've been involved in it, so certainly we'd love to hear from you on this with anything you're thinking of.
Sure, I'm happy if people have thoughts they want to add or say, please go first, and I can add my thoughts in after as a guest here tonight.
Louis Barnes has his hand up.
I'd say go ahead, Louis.
Okay, thank you. Hold on. All the Zoom meetings, they always say, got your hand up to get to speak. So I'm on the board of directors for VAS, and that's what we do. So I don't know if this is the time to bring it up, or are you guys just talking about the grant stuff now? Because I'd like to talk about, I really don't know what's going on, about stop signs on Pine Street.
We're going to be talking about that in depth shortly, as soon as we get Kevin back on the phone or back on the line. But we will be showing what our proposal is going to be. But by all means, please, the floor is yours.
Well, I can wait till we hit that subject if you like. That's fine.
That's fine as well. Yeah, that we can wait till then.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Of course.
So in terms of the grant, there's lots of opportunities there. Melanie presented what she felt might be needed in the town. And it's all sort of connected with various initiatives that you are working on as a committee. You have, obviously, as Louis mentioned, stop signs on Pine. You have the striped sort of walking areas on Pine. You have striped bicycle lanes on North Street. And that's also connected with like the speed reduction that the select board is currently working on, that we're working on for the town. So you would have to sort of work through and figure out what made the most sense in terms of the grant money that's available, and also what you could put together in the short amount of time. It's the middle of the month. It's not the 27th or 22nd. It's like the 14th or something. I had it in the email. So it's not a huge amount of time. It's like a couple of weeks to put a grant together, and I don't know how detailed the grant needs to be. But obviously, it's time is of the essence if you want to apply for this. For me, I thought Melanie's suggestion, which was having a activated crosswalk at Spring and Pleasant and North, made a lot of sense. You have the reasoning behind that is that it's a very high traffic school walking area. Currently, you do have just static crosswalk signs as well as a bollard in the middle that gets put there during the warmer months. But you still have a pretty good amount of speed of people coming to and from the town along North Street. And we have speed studies to sort of show that, what the average speed or the 85th percentile. So I like the idea of having a push button there. I like the idea because it gives people crossing, especially kids, more control. And obviously, it's not a be all and end all in terms of stopping traffic, but I think it does help a great deal, and it allows you to make the decision instead of having a pedestrian have to wait for the cars. The select board hasn't spoken about that particular area to have something like that, so this committee would have to present that to the select board, and I don't know if we have enough time to do that and actually get it approved before you might apply for the grant. So I don't know how that would go. I guess you could apply for it and hope that the select board approves something like that. I think as a select board member, and I only speak for myself, that it is a very good candidate for a push button crosswalk sign.
Got it. Ian, to that end, this kind of, I don't want to characterize that it came and went, but there was inside of the last couple of months, there was a survey or something around the airport road, around the sidewalk, or doing something there. Do you
Correct.
know how, if that goes through, how that would plan to be funded? Is that something that could be funded under this, or is that not? Do you think that would?
It could, but I don't know. It's usually with a project of that size, if we decide to do what the recommendations are, it's a good chunk of money, like maybe, well, let's see, how much are sidewalks? It's like 70 or 80,000, I think.
Okay.
It's high. So with this kind of grant, I think it's more focused on small infrastructure.
Yeah.
So, that could be a possibility, and maybe you could use some of this grant money for that. I would say that it was a scoping study that was done, similar to Munsell.
Yeah.
That was also a scoping study. Both of those scoping studies are wrapping up and will be presented with the final package, which will also contain a dollar figure attached to it as well, if we wanted to go ahead and move towards construction on either of those areas. But I would say that that's a ways off, I think, before a decision might be made on those.
Okay, got it. Jim.
To Ian, on your last discussion about applying for a grant first, I think the select board wants to have the authority to have your committees ask them if it's okay to apply for a grant. I think that's how it's gone in the past. So maybe
That's true.
You may
Yeah.
get to that format.
Right. That's true. Yeah. Usually it's if a committee, you're right, Jim, if you are applying, regardless of the project, the grant process goes through select board first. And we could definitely look at that. We have other meetings scheduled coming up. So you could put the grant application on there as the committee, Chris, to be able to put that forward. But you're right. Thanks for reminding me about that, Jim.
Rather than having a conflict, they're better off.
Yes.
Yep.
Yeah. And
Understood.
also too, the committee doesn't want to waste time by doing something that then the select board may not approve down the road too. So.
Exactly. Okay.
Oh, that is right now, as far as the agenda is concerned, that's the only real formal non-voting issue that we have on the agenda tonight. That said, that comment might be academic, since once again, even when Kevin jumps back in, we're without a quorum this month. Tanya?
Just a quick question on the Mountain Street calming possibilities.
Yes.
And you said Davino, and I couldn't remember if we had any sort of studies or surveys or anything that said like that area in particular on the street was the biggest problem, or is it just the whole street?
It was I don't want to use the wrong term. I don't want to say anecdotal, when it's actually people that who either walk that area or live in that area have come to us in a variety of ways and said, hey, because they knew about what we had been doing or what we had been planning on Pine Street. They knew about the overall angle of the advisory committee. And they said, it would be nice if you started to look at Mountain Street. It's tremendously exposed down towards that end. Once the sidewalk ends, not only do you not have any protection, you have the left and the right there. And
Yep.
cars tend to be going through there as quickly as possible. Back when Jerry was on the committee, he knows that area intimately. He weighed in, said down towards the actual North Street end of the road, that it gets to be a little bit wild down there quite often. So this was all just geared towards, we knew there was a challenge there. We knew that the rest of Mountain Street had at least a protected sidewalk there. And
Right.
certainly as you get down towards the school itself, it's something that I don't think we would ever not consider what kind of bike lanes, whether they were painted or otherwise, we could install or help move forward down towards the school, because not unlike the crosswalk area that we're talking about, which is very much geared towards, not specifically, but very much geared towards the elementary school traffic, foot traffic and bike traffic, you have the same thing at that part of Mountain Street. So that's where the idea for that end of Mountain Street came from, was an identification that was an incredibly challenging part for walkers and cyclists. And certainly, again, we're trying to take the long view here. I can't imagine us wanting to stop once we finally have a good case study, a good example of here's what traffic calming looks like. What other areas can we use it for in the village and then beyond in the town? You know, we talked two meetings ago, I believe, the subject of the intersection of Plank Road came up as well, and what we could potentially do out there. That's obviously going to be a longer term one, but not unlike the end of Mountain Street, came to us from the same thing. People saying, hey, you know, that is a really tricky area if you're on foot, or especially if you're on a bike and you're trying to cross that street. So, Ian, unfortunately, as I just mentioned, it does not look like we're going to have a quorum tonight. That said, I would still like to go forward, since we've got so many members of the public tonight. I'd still like to go forward and walk people through what we have for a plan for Pine Street, since right now it's only been the members of the committee that have seen it. Ian, do you have control over screen sharing for this?
I actually don't, because I'm logged in as me. What happens?
Yeah, me too, unfortunately.
How do we do this then? Because I attempted to log in as the town, and it did the thing that
it was doing to me.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
let's see.
We could.
Yeah, what?
I mean, I can talk people through it. If I would assume everybody on the call is familiar enough that the plan itself is not complex. It's the kind of thing that you can, despite the fact that, and all this material, obviously, for everyone on the call, this material is all publicly available on the BPAC share. But we'll talk. We can talk everybody through the gist of this whole thing, starting with the project context. So previously, in years past, by what is now known as the ad hoc committee, the informal committee that came as a precursor to this one, Pine Street was identified by that committee as a place where, over the years, you know, time had passed Pine Street by as far as the opportunity to efficiently and cheaply put in sidewalks. Obviously, right now we're about to go into a zone of trying to get the pipes underneath Pine Street fixed as well. So Pine Street was identified as a place where some type of initiative that would help pedestrians and cyclists who travel that street very, very regularly. It's part of both the smaller loops that people travel inside of the village, and it's part of what's been known informally as the big loop, meaning the biggest pedestrian or bike kind of path you can take around the entire district inside. It's a key part of that. So traffic calming as an initiative was identified by the select board and handed over to the advisory committee to figure out what to do there. Ian, correct me if I'm wrong, but initially lane painting was approved and budgeted for by the select board prior to this committee being started?
Correct. Well, from the ad hoc committee, they made recommendations for Pine Street to try to calm traffic and speeds with doing line painting. And so they came up with a proposal to do pedestrian walkways and turning Pine Street into a single lane for cars, and have dashed lines either side. When that was finally sort of on the table for the select board, the certain members of the select board, a number actually, questioned that just because of the confusion that might happen. It had been presented, but the public didn't really know about it and the potential for that happening. And so it was put on pause, and we asked the official committee now to sort of revisit that. So that's where we're at the moment. We're just sort of looking to see how we can present that. And I have to agree, sort of the more time that's passed, the more time I've spent on that street, also looking at streets that have had similar line paintings done. I do think that on Pine, because of its length and because of the amount of traffic that it gets, I do think we could run into some issues with establishing that there without the public's knowledge and sort of education or pre-education.
So that in this bullet point follows Ian's point that he just made. We have to understand that all of that comes against a backdrop of considerable feedback we've gotten from Pine Street residents, indicating that there is a good amount of support for a multi-pronged approach to both the volume of traffic and the behavior / speed of it, both independent of pedestrian and bicycle traffic and inclusive of it. So that all said, we decided as a group that a good interim step before doing this line painting thing and this one lane but bi-directional traffic approach was to look at stop signs. Do we pick a couple of key intersections and put stop signs in? So why stop signs? The initiative is one of the main projects that we're undergoing as a pedestrian and bicycle and pedestrian advisory committee. We wanted to look at stop signs at specific intersections because they can provide a couple things. They'll have a combined effect together with what we hope will end up happening, but it's obviously up in the air right now, of the considering, we're all considering lowering the district speed limit to 25 miles an hour. You'll have the combined effect of making Pine Street much more friendly and traversable by slowing down traffic overall, while also making the intersections, and this is something that people have looked at independently of the traffic calming, making the intersections much more friendly. Currently, at least one of them, the Munsell and Pine intersection, is incredibly challenging for anyone coming in any direction, and that only gets exacerbated in the winter months when the snow starts to pile up on the corners. So what we ended up looking at was obviously first considering, do we put stop signs at every single intersection on the Pine Street? And so from one end to the other, from basically the dump all the way down, do we put stop signs there? We decided against that approach for any number of reasons. Obviously, it's a very scorched earth approach to this, and it would be probably an overcorrection for what we're trying to do as far as slowing traffic down and making the intersections more approachable. So just some quick notes on Pine Street. Obviously runs east-west. It's approximately a half mile long. There are 5 T intersections. 4 of those intersections have stop signs on the northbound street sides, basically the intersecting streets. The terminus, North Street, that intersection has a stop sign on the eastbound street side. The Pine to Liberty route is used oftentimes, and this is, we can certainly, I don't know if studies have been done on this, but this is certainly the opinion of many of the people on Pine Street that have talked with us about this. The Pine to Liberty route is used as a bypass for all intents and purposes due to the lack of stop signs. The west to south run effectively has no stop signs at all. So if you're trying to get around the town, you can go west to south very easily without hitting any stop signs. Additionally, the current Pine Munsell intersection stop sign is around 30 feet back from Pine. That is a tremendous amount of distance that you have to creep up on if you're coming from Munsell. In addition, the house that's across the street on the Munsell side has vegetation, which makes looking that way difficult, as well as obviously the building and the bank that's up against Bristol Works makes looking down that end difficult as well. So what we've been proposing is the suggested actions are to install stop signs and lines at the Pine Munsell intersection in the eastbound and westbound directions lanes. Paint a stop line at the Pine Munsell intersection on the Munsell northbound lane, and install stop signs and lines at the Pine Maple intersection in the eastbound and westbound directions and lanes. And the plan that we have publicly available notes all of these things. It gives a survey of this existing stop signs. It visualizes what stop signs and stop lines at the Pine Munsell intersection and the Pine Maple intersection would be. And that's what we were hoping to vote on tonight, as far as getting the committee's approval so that we could go in front of the select board with that as a suggestion, as an interim step. So, Louis, there's our end of things. We'd love to hear from you on this.
Okay. I agree with some of the stuff you're saying, but others I don't. I do believe maybe a stop sign at Munsell, like you said. And if people's property bushes are blinding people's sight of way, the town has the right to cut those bushes back so people do have the right of way to get through there. As far as the Maple Street, putting that stop sign on Pine Street, that would make 2 stops on Pine Street for everybody going down to the dump on Saturday. Plus, I look at Pine Street as kind of being a commercial street because it feeds all those commercial buildings, the police department, the health, the dentist, all those people that are all down there. I mean, so you're trying to make people stop quite a few times, which is wear and tear on vehicles and emissions and everything like that also. I don't agree with that part of it. And there really isn't that many houses on Pine Street itself. The side streets coming off in Pine Street has, houses all down through there. But as far as houses themselves, you really don't have a lot of houses on Pine Street. And I don't know why be a lot of people using that street. I understand you're saying with a big loop, some people are ambitious for the big loop, but you got to also take into consideration the impact on commercial use and people using that. And I understand there's problems with speed on there. I'm all for putting the police department down there. You know as well as I do that word of mouth gets around real fast in any little small town. And if there's word of mouth that there's police officers sitting there shooting radar and stopping people, then I think that will help a lot in slowing people down. And I think probably a lot of your traffic on that is younger people going to school or coming home from school is when you have a lot of the speeders on Munsell or Liberty Street onto Pine Street. So that's my thought on that. I'm done.
Got it. Thank you very much.
So just an FYI that the issue with the traffic is much more about the walkers and bikers, et cetera, that are on that street, less about the houses on that street, because that is probably the most popular road for walkers and bikers to frequent in the town. So it's more about the danger with that than people living along that road.
Oh, well, you said that concerns about people on Pine Street. That's where I got that from. You referenced that a couple of times that you talked to the residents of Pine Street. I've been on Pine Street quite a bit. I don't go use it for going around. I do use it maybe going to Martin's or going down to the dump. And I've never really seen a lot of bikers and pedestrians on that road. Maybe I'm just not at the right time. I would like to see, before you bring this proposal to the selectmen, put a survey out there or put it in the paper what you're thinking of and see what kind of response you get from not just the town, not just the village, but the whole town.
Liberty, they really do. Because you can't see the pickup trucks leaving the garbage.
Sorry, it sounds like somebody else was talking.
I'm trying to talk. Can you hear me? Hello?
We can
Yeah.
hear.
Yes, we can.
Can you identify yourselves just so we know who's speaking?
Hello, this is Bridgie Lawrence speaking. I live at 35 Pine Street.
It's great to hear from you.
Oh, nice. Well, we meet finally.
Yes.
Well, first of all, on Saturday morning, when there aren't skateboarders and little kids biking or dog walkers necessarily when people are taking their garbage to the dumpsters. But I do think that that a stop sign at Munsell and Pine would be very helpful. I also think I'm not sure I would like one at Maple because I live very close to Maple, and to think of trucks constantly braking and emissions, and there are quite a few houses there. There are a lot of houses on Pine Street. I personally wouldn't like it, but if the committee thinks it would be useful, then that's the way it is. Also on Munsell, not Munsell, Pine. Pine and Liberty also would be useful to have a stop sign because the trucks coming from the dumpsters on Saturday morning, it's very hard to see when you make a right turn. They come zipping along there. But I had originally thought that a stop sign at Taylor and Pine Street would be useful. Possibly Jackman's might even like it. And also, instead of a stop sign at Maple and Pine, to have a yellow flashing lights, a pedestrian crossing for the mountain, for the health center. People park across on the lot. They're constantly walking across Monday through Friday. That alone might help to slow down the traffic on Pine Street, and certainly the 25-mile-an-hour speed limit. Also, a sign possibly saying when you turn onto Pine Street from North Street, high enforcement area for all those people who are taking the shortcut, especially in the summer. We get motorcycle not gangs, but groups of motorcycles bypassing the town. So those are just my thoughts, but I'm sure the committee will make all the right decisions.
We appreciate we appreciate you joining us this month, Brigitte.
Thank you.
Louis Barnes is speaking again. Is that okay?
Go ahead, Louis.
Well, I think I was cut off when I spoke last time. I'm not sure what you heard. I said it'd be nice maybe if you had put a survey out or put out a statement on Front Porch Forum and the Addison Independent of what you're thinking about doing with stop signs and stuff, and get feedback from the whole town, not just the village, on their thoughts on this proposal.
Got it.
And also about trimming those. If there really is I'll look at it when I get home. I'm in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania right now at my youngest son's house. And down here, they don't have sidewalks on anything out in the rural part of Pittsburgh. It's awful. Thin streets and no sidewalks anywhere. So you got to really be careful walking around here. But they should really trim those bushes back if it's a problem of people seeing at that intersection.
Yeah, and Lewis was right in terms of at the select board level, we have the ability to trim, but often we would ask the property owner, homeowner first to be able to do that, and if they're unable to, if we feel it's a danger to either pedestrians or traffic, then town would trim. I have a couple thoughts.
Sure.
So in the discussions for the changing the former village area for 25 miles per hour, we have some speed data from the Addison County Regional Planning Commission. And I don't know if I've sent this to you, Chris, or if you had access to this. I got this recently from them, as we had the discussions. Essentially, this started, the idea has been sort of floated around a while to sort of reduce the speed, to help speed in town. And Joel proposed it at the select board level. And then we've sort of been working through it, and we've had support for both, positive support for it, and also people concerned about reducing the speed, and thoughts that it's maybe unnecessary. So we have some speed data from Regional Planning Commission that was done in 2020, and they have one for Pine Street. And so this was done in October of 2020. And it shows that the average speed of cars on Pine is 23 miles an hour. And the 85th percentile, which is the number that the state looks at when you're changing or when you're setting speed limits, was 28 miles an hour. So to the state, it looks like people are obeying the speed limit and we don't have a speed problem. And in fact, the way that the state looks at it, if your average speed is 23 and you're actually lower than 30, you actually have a case for lowering the speed limit to 25 because that's what average cars are already using, and that's the speed they're already going at.
Yep.
So when you have other streets like Liberty, this was something where they also did a speed study there, same time period, and they found that the average speed was about 29 miles an hour, and the 85th percentile was 35 miles an hour. So that's something where the cars are going much faster than the speed limit, and you had a very high enforcement rating, meaning that if you're going over 30, you're going to get a ticket. But at the same time, the state would look at that and say, well, you're not allowed to lower the speed limit because it's not the speed limit that's the issue, it's your road that's the issue. Your road is allowing cars to go too fast down there. And so they want you as a town or a city to look at other ways to lower your speed. And lane, making your lanes less wide than they are, using other types of speed enforcement or speed bumps, things like that, are recommendations at the state level. I do feel though that lowering the speed limit works in favor, and there are studies that have been done that have demonstrated that cities that have lowered their speed limits have seen a reduction. But there's also studies that are the opposite of that too. But I do feel in Liberty, it's because of that cut through. It seems like people maybe aren't going at the speeds we think on Pine, or it's a very small percentile of traffic, but we can definitely see that there is a big problem on Liberty. So it'd be really nice to sort of focus on that street particularly, just because traffic seems to be going much, much faster than it should be on that street. And it's much more dangerous, especially because you're passing through a school zone area where kids are crossing the street.
Yep.
And I'll send you those details, but it's something that I don't think the select board had before, or we had been told about it, and then I finally got it. And so I've been just looking at the studies that have been done and making a list of other roads that we'd like to have done. They can only do it every few years because they have a lot of towns sort of requesting that they do this. But at least we have some streets.
No, thank you. We appreciate that. For one, to answer your first question, I had not seen that data, or we had not heard that data. But two, the other reason for thanking you for telling us all that is at the very beginning, at the very onset of the outset of the committee being formed, I think you did tell us part of the story of state requirements for how they looked at speed data relative to raising or lowering speed limits. You just filled in a lot of blanks with what you said about the 23 mile an hour thing and the 85th percentile and all that. So thank you for educating us on that. I feel like we have a much better, there's obviously a lot of us feeling around in the dark for some of these state regulations right now.
Right.
And that fills in a lot of the blanks that I think some of us had around this.
And it feels counterintuitive. It seems like
Yes.
we want this particular area because this is our town, and I'm speaking as a resident of the town, to be safe, especially if you're walking in a dense neighborhood or in a school zone. And so the thinking is like, yes, I'd like people to go, it's 30, it's too fast for these areas, so let's reduce it to 25. But if you can't demonstrate that your road supports that at the state level, then it's a more difficult way of handling things. Mm-hmm. And I think that the reasoning is that the average driver will drive, and I don't know if I fully believe this, the average driver will drive the speed that they feel is safe. And so if you have wider roads and wider lanes, you may be driving faster, especially if you have a less dense housing area, let's say. But if you're getting into narrower, sort of smaller village streets, you're automatically going a slower speed and not going through because you feel closer, you're closer to trees, maybe or hedges or houses or sidewalks. So that's their reasoning. And again, it's like that's how the state looks at it, but you do have wiggle room either way, and you can present information about your particular town and the things that you think are important in the town, or at least demonstrate to the state why you feel that a speed reduction with your signage is important in this area, as well as other things that you're looking at to reduce speed.
Yep. And I think you said some interesting things there about levers that the town can pull on Liberty Street to slow things down. They might be things that we can consider for Pine Street as well. Speed bumps as one example.
Right.
Because again, and Louis, I see you're still on to be clear, like our committee lives in an interesting intersection of a few different things, right? First of all, we're an advisory committee. We can only suggest things based on our purview, which is and will remain, since it's in our name. We are here to promote the health and well-being of the pedestrian and bicycle traffic within the town, not simply within the village. We happen to be focusing on one or two village initiatives first, and then we're spreading out into other areas of the town. Obviously, that intersects with we support any measure that the town is taking in parallel with those initiatives. The 25-mile-an-hour speed limit being one of them. We did not bring that to the town, but we certainly support those types of things. So we will certainly, I think, I just wanted everybody on the call to be clear. Our audience is the bicycle and pedestrian traffic within the town, and that's kind of the angle we're coming from.
Yeah, I
think-
have a couple.
Go on,
I'd like
Liz.
to have a couple things to say real quick. One, when you guys are talking about the grant and with those blinking pedestrian lights for crossing, I think that's a great idea. I like that idea a lot in the places you were saying. And isn't there a crosswalk on Liberty Street for the kids going to the high school and junior high? And if there is, that'd be a great place to put one of those blinking lights for pedestrians. That would definitely help slow people down, just like the lady said, by the healthcare.
Great
I
idea.
agree with that.
Yeah, there is. I mean, that is a major crossing intersection, and it doesn't have one of those. And I have two kids, and I live in the former village, and I walk down there to the pump track, and it is very difficult to get cars to stop at that intersection or that crossing. So I do think something like that would be very useful, because it gives you as a pedestrian, whether you're with a child or not, just much more control. And oftentimes you can hit the button and people still breeze through. And I get pretty pissed at that. But it does at least allow you to have a little bit of control as a pedestrian to hopefully slow traffic down and stop and let you cross.
Right, and I think it'll slow down the traffic too, because people will be looking for that now too when it starts blinking. Yeah. Okay.
Tanya.
I'm assuming that it costs a lot more to do the flashing yellow versus a regular stop sign in those situations.
Ian, it's surprisingly, I think when you mentioned what the ones that we put in previously were, I was surprised at how I don't want to call them cheap, but I was expecting them to be a full-on public works project style budget, and they weren't.
They're not bad. I don't know the numbers off the top of my head. It's definitely, you want a grant for it. It's not just in the town budget. But they also, they serve a very different purpose to a stop sign too. A stop sign is accommodating traffic versus this, where it's accommodating and working for pedestrians. So it is a different thing, but they do work. We don't have a lot in town, and one of the suggestions from multiple sort of sources says that you don't want to inundate your town with them, because you start to then become very accustomed to them. We only have two in Bristol. One was put in, I think 3 years ago, right by the National Bank, right in downtown. And that was something that I initiated because I recognized that people were just driving through Main Street and not stopping at the already established crosswalk at National Bank and not the Hatch Block, but the where Vermont Tree Goods was. So we put one in there, and that's been very successful. And again, it gives you that control to allow cars to stop. And then the second one that we've added fairly recently, within the last year, is over at the crosswalk by the fire station. And that was always supposed to be put in And we finally got to it, especially because there's a new housing development just broken ground there now. So there's a crosswalk from the rec club field right across to Firehouse Drive. And then again, as people come up Stony Hill Road, be able to see that, that allows you to stop cars. Whereas before, I mean, there was no crosswalk there at all. So no one was going to stop. If they saw you, some would stop. But now that you have a direct button that you can push and flashing lights, it's been very successful.
Yep. Tanya.
The person that already hopped off the call that mentioned having a possible flashing yellow light on Pine instead, of saying like highly enforced area or something. It's an interesting idea. I do wonder though if actually the residents might be annoyed if it's right in front of their house flashing yellow versus a sign which doesn't interrupt their quaint view, you know.
Ian and I can forward. I think I've forwarded them in the past. We can forward. We've got Brigitte's ideas in email form that we can send around. That said, Ian, on that note, from time to time, crosswalk has been painted across that road in that area. Does the town paint that, or did Bristol Works paint that?
I think the town paints it.
Okay.
And I don't know if it's specifically requested.
Yeah.
We would have to find out, or you would have to find out more information about how that's used. If the you know, and it's only one, if the single speed study that we have around this time of year from 2020 demonstrates is that cars are going fairly slow on Pine Street, even the 85th percentile. So, you know, I don't necessarily feel strongly about having a push button crosswalk or a flashing light there. I do feel, because of the sight distance both ways, that you can cross fairly safely just with a painted crosswalk, if there was a painted crosswalk there. And again, that gives you a little bit more confidence that a driver would see that it's a painted crosswalk and cross. You could also, if you are able to find out that yes, a tremendous amount of foot traffic crosses that road every single day because the parking lot's there, maybe just to have pedestrian crosswalk signs put in at that location would help as well.
Yep.
Yeah, I agree with what you're saying, Ian, about the crosswalk too. Putting in a crosswalk there, and that way people come from that parking lot would just be crossing in one place, and everybody would get used to those people crossing in that one place. And the other thing I got to say is, you're putting stop signs on Pine Street. That also means that bicyclists have to stop at those stop signs also.
Yeah.
Because you don't want to have a car stop and see a bicyclist coming thinking they're going to stop and then pull out and hit a bicyclist. You got to make sure that all bicyclists know that stop signs also mean for them to be stopping.
Right. And a lot of cyclists don't obey that. I've seen plenty go right through stop signs and stop lights, which is very frustrating. It's a shame.
Yeah. If the police officers are going to give people tickets for going through stop signs in cars, and they need to do it also for bicyclists. At least warning the first time or something. Then if it's the same person the second time, then give them a ticket. I have no problem with that.
Yeah, and our chief and our police department is always on the side of warnings before ticketing. It's not, ticketing isn't a thing that they focus on at all. You know, they want to have safe drivers and safe pedestrians and safe cyclists in town. I do think, Louis, your suggestion of a survey and putting it out in Front Porch Forum is a good one. Similar to the select board's hesitation on striping Pine with this new initiative, especially a single lane. You know, the concern was, are people just going to be very confused about what's going on? You know, given the amount of traffic on that street, if you suddenly add it where it just becomes the next day a single lane that you can go two cars side by side if you go into the dashed lines. We just thought that was like, we just imagined hell breaking loose by doing that.
Oh yeah.
Especially because we hadn't really put it out there to the public and made suggestions. And so since talking about that, I do feel that's the case, because just walking down Pine and seeing what cars do without the lines there is already a bit strange. I think adding the lines would add a little bit more. One of the suggestions I did have, and I put this forward in other areas, is that the select board's currently working on scoping studies for sidewalks on Munsell Ave as well as Airport Drive. So if Munsell Ave, for whatever reason, doesn't get a sidewalk because there isn't enough support for one from the people who live on Munsell because they're concerned about losing land and infringing on their property, which I totally understand. Or if on the other side, the trees would be damaged in Bristol Works, which have been established for decades, Munsell could be a nice contender to sort of try a single lane and having a striped area for walking if we feel that's necessary. There are also other streets, and maybe Liberty, given the speeds that we're seeing, maybe that's something where we have enough space to stripe pedestrian walkways and to be able to get people to slow down. But again, I think it's just, unfortunately, you want to move forward and do things, but there are so many considerations that you have to look at when you're proposing these things. It just takes a bit of time.
Understood. I think I can speak to Pine Street. I walk Pine Street almost every day. I'll give an example of yesterday. I walked it well in advance of sunset, walked out of the house at around 4. So no issues with sight or anything like that. The challenge for cyclists and pedestrians on Pine Street, whether you're walking against the flow of traffic or you're riding a bicycle with the flow of traffic is, and this goes to, Ian, your comment about the oddity of how cars behave on that street today is, right now, in most cases, cyclists and pedestrians on Pine Street end up being treated like the burdened vehicle. They end up being the ones that have to stop and move over for cars that aren't yielding to them. And in no law that I can find in the state of Vermont, should a pedestrian walking against traffic or a single bicycle riding with traffic end up being the burdened vehicle if they're being passed in either direction by an automobile. And so without lines, that creates the absence of lines for pedestrians and cyclists will continue to perpetuate that behavior until something's done. That's just a fact of the matter, is that pedestrians and cyclists on that street, on a completely unprotected street, the burden is on them, and that's not the law.
Right.
So I think
the law says that the vehicle has to be at least 3 feet away from a bicyclist when passing.
that is the law for cyclists. And a pedestrian should not.
For myself, but
I don't think you'll get any argument from anybody on this call. 3 feet gets awfully small when the speed increases too.
I thought that too.
So, but anyway, that's the thing.
Cyclist, but I agree with that.
It's one of these things where Pine Street, because of the volume of both car traffic and cyclists and pedestrians, a solution has to be arrived at. And understanding that in a perfect world, it's something that comes from multiple directions. We've got the stop sign thing is a step in the right direction. I think, Ian, when we think about the single lane, double direction thing, we know that outreach is going to be key to that if we continue to move forward to that at some point, in educating people, because I agree with you too. Like, I think Munsell is also a prime place for potentially doing that. And there's probably plenty of other places in town that we can look at something like that as well. So we want to, the idea is that we get a successful case study up and running at some point with that line situation.
And again, all of this, because it's striping, because it's just paint, all of this is temporary. So you can present it as not a permanent thing if people voice concern about that, is that this is something that we're trying out. You warn people well ahead of time that this is happening, and you test it for a year, going through multiple seasons, and you see how it is. And if it doesn't work at all, you're finding a lot more difficulties that have been created, then obviously that paint wears out, and you try something else. I don't know with Pine, the reason that the single lane came up is because of the width of the street. Yeah. If you want to put pedestrian walkways on both sides, you are limited with how wide your traffic lane becomes. And I don't know, I know it was talked about, but I don't know if there are any studies in terms of just having a single pedestrian cyclist lane and then still having 2 lanes of traffic. And I don't know if that has been studied, or if this group did it or the ad hoc group did it, but maybe that's something that we could look at least that allows you to have 2 lanes, and again, maybe we don't have the space for this. It allows you to have 2 lanes and have at least one safe side of sidewalk or striped sidewalk that could help pedestrians and cyclists on that street.
We have a couple things that we can look at, and we'll probably have to do a little bit more research into this, but we have the width measurements for the length of the street. And I know off the top of my head, it was even more constrained when we actually measured it than we had previously thought, which I think is really what necessitated, is why I think you all went in the right direction with the single lane thing, is because when we had originally looked at 5 feet for these pedestrian and bike lanes, and that would have left something like, in some areas, like 9 feet for a traveling lane for cars. In some other cases, 11 feet or something like that. Precious little, basically not enough space. We do have 2 things that we can go to. One obviously trumps the other, but we obviously have DOT guidance on what these things should be, and we have ADA guidance on what these things should be. We've done some lightweight research into both of those things. I know from some cities, a good example of this is Burlington. Burlington has a couple streets where they have single direction, one-way streets with 2-way bike and pedestrian lanes. So your car traffic, and I'm not saying that's not a suggestion that's on the table, obviously, for this. Please nobody read that. But they've got, it's kind of the inverse of what you're saying. And it takes, because think about what would happen. Pick the right side, pick the lee side of Pine Street, right? Pick the south side of Pine Street. If you were to make a combined pedestrian bicycle lane on there, would we make that a 2-way pedestrian and bicycle lane?
Right.
That lane itself would be, based on what we've seen in cities like Burlington, that would be a fairly wide lane.
Yeah.
You know, to make that now you've got to contend with bicycle and pedestrian traffic potentially going in 2 different ways, in 2 different directions. So it's a good idea. It's something we can look at, because thankfully I think there's guidance out there, and there's plenty of examples of things like that we can look at.
I mean, it'd be also to be interesting to look at, if for the roads that have no lines on them at all, what happens if you just put lines for traffic? Like, I was biking up west yesterday from the firehouse, and it was the groundbreaking for the new apartments that are being built there. And so I was on a bike, and so I left Firehouse Drive and rode up West Street, and there are no bicycle or pedestrian lanes. And so yes. I was in the outer lane of the side of the road striping, and I felt better there than I did sort of in the street as cars passed me. So with something like that, can you, with Liberty or with Pine, if we just stripe those roads and you had a little bit of a shoulder, and it's obviously not creating your walking and biking lane, but it is creating a lane that cars are then on the inside of and not the outside. And so does that slow down traffic, and does that give a little bit more safety to people walking, because they feel that they're over these lines towards the houses each side, but at least cars are staying in those lines, versus cars being close to the edge on either side, or kind of in the middle, or all over the place. I'm just curious if there's studies been done. And I know that's not a direct thing, like you're creating this bike lane, but you are dictating where the cars should be. And so it does give you this kind of buffer where pedestrians or cyclists might be.
It's a very interesting angle. I'll do some research on if there's a legal minimum width for a car lane, because I think I would assume that it's it's more complex than simply drawing a yellow line down the middle and then arbitrarily assigning, oh, okay, well that looks about right, because we know from measuring Pine Street that the areas of Pine Street that you wouldn't be able to drive in, if I'm getting your description right, there's areas that could be measured in inches at some of the sections there. But to your point, that wouldn't be the idea, is to give cars a zone to stay in versus. Yes. It's an interesting angle.
Yeah. And maybe that's something that again is tried on Liberty, where again there is no striping either in the middle or either side. So if we want to slow cars down, if we have a hard time making a case to say we'd like this road to be 25 because the state says, hey, cars are going to go what they're going to go and we feel that's safe, you have to do other things.
Yeah.
If we striped that road, could we then run speed tests over a year, let's say, of doing that to see if that reduces car speed, because they have their lanes and those lanes are narrow. I mean, one of the ideas is that other cities have done to slow traffic is to have narrower lanes. And obviously there's going to be a minimum width that you have to do, but can we go to that minimum to try to see if cars slow down on that road?
Yeah, because I think back on the subject of Pine Street, when we looked at when we first started, it was mentioned maybe by you, Ian, maybe it's in the documentation on Pine Street, that it isn't simply a case of Pine Street being narrow. It's Pine Street potentially is too narrow to be considered a 2-lane road in its current form, correct?
It's something like that.
Yeah, it's something odd like that.
It's very tight if you start to do that.
Yeah.
But I'm wondering, like, if you stripe either side and don't do a center line, what that does. That's almost trying to do your single lane that people are negotiating.
Yes.
But it does give you a little bit more to play with.
Yes, I'm smiling because of that. Kevin, we see your note. Thank you for joining us tonight.
So yeah, but again, I think there's more study, and I think the big question that was asked at a couple select board meetings from people who were concerned about the speed changing was studies. That's something that we didn't have at our fingertips at the time in terms of to be able to direct people to, but I since now have received. And also I'm getting more information from the chief of police and the studies that they've run with their cameras and speed setups that they've done around town. It's just a matter of taking that data and putting into something useful. So, we do have a lot of information that demonstrates that people are actually going slower than we think. And it is kind of perception in some cases. And I feel that too, walking in the streets. I feel people are going fast, but I bet if I had a radar gun, they'd probably be going the speed limit or they'd be going below it. But I also feel that in certain areas, even if people are going below 30, especially on Main Street, because we have diagonal parking and you have to back out, 30 is just too fast.
Yes.
That's not a speed that's acceptable. And often if you're a truck coming in, and you've just passed Mountain Street and you're still going at 30, if someone backs out, you're going to have a hard time stopping.
Find the trucks that are going 30 at that point too.
Right. Right. And oftentimes, and again, it's perception again, and those trucks could be going 25, which is what we are proposing for the speed limit. But I still feel 25 is too fast through there. I can set my car at 25 and drive through, and it's way too fast.
It's way too fast.
There's no way I'm going to be able to stop. And probably the 85th percentile, again, if you did that speed study, they're gonna be below what you think they are. But it's then working on, if it's not your speed limit sign, what are other things that can be done to get traffic going really slow in the areas where you want them to be really slow.
Mm-hmm. So everyone, again, unfortunately, we don't have enough members here tonight for a quorum. So the two things that we needed to vote on, mission statement selection, as well as the Pine Street plan presentation, can't move forward. That said, we got some great input on the Pine Street plan that we can certainly mold in and consider as far as when we are in a position to present it to the select board, as well as a lot of other things to think about too. If everybody doesn't mind, can move on to other business. Does anybody have anything else to discuss this month? So, motion to adjourn.
Seconded.
Perfect. Everyone, I just want to thank you all for joining this week, especially members of the public, some of whom are joining us for the first time. Louis, thank you so much for your thoughts, especially your time. You made it the whole run. We're very thankful for that. Gang from NEAT, as always, thank you for hooking us up with the recording. Ian, a pleasure to have your guidance as always as well. We will be getting back in touch with you. I've got a lot of follow-up questions and some other things to run by you as well. See you all in the email chain. I'm going to throw all this stuff is obviously available in the share. Look in your email. I've got another thing similar to the studies that Ian was talking about, the speed studies. I've got some more national trend based studies about pedestrian and bicycle safety that I came across in the last couple of weeks that I'm going to throw in there. I'll let you all know when that's there. Okay.
Great. Thanks, Chris.
You're welcome. Thank you, Ian. Thank you, everybody. Thanks, Jim, Kevin, Tanya, Lewis. Have a good night.
You too.